With Will on 531 VI.
It is 15 minutes past 8 o'clock. It is really brilliant to have your company this Wednesday. Hoping you're easing into your morning well. Broadcasting to you live from Rarotonga this morning. Appreciate your company. Now, Te'o Harry Fatu Toleafoa is a qualified barrister and solicitor with a Masters of Laws and a deep focus on Pacific peoples in his legal work. He joins us now to share his insights on the government's proposed electoral reforms and what they could mean for Pacific and working class voters in communities like Māngere. Māngere-Otahuhu Local welcome in. Thank you very much for your time.
Kia ora, Will. Thank you for having me on this morning.
No, I appreciate your company. Hey, look, I want to perhaps get your initial reaction first off the government's proposal, which includes, of course, things like scrapping same-day voting and basically having to do it much more in advance. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I think I guess it's important for the benefit of our listeners to understand in a nutshell what these reforms are, from the outset. So it's what we call an omnibus bill called the Electoral Amendment Bill, which brings together key laws, including the Electoral Act, with a view to improve the efficiency and integrity of the electoral system, And they want to actually conduct this or carry this out by carrying out four key reforms. And the first one that you mentioned, which is probably the most controversial one, is the removal of same-day enrollment and voting. So as the law stands, I could initially turn up on the voting day and actually cast my vote. Well, no longer can I do that. They actually will close voting enrollment 13 days before the election day. There's three other pieces in terms of what the key reforms are. Reinstating a total ban on prisoner voters, which will have an impact on Pasifika peoples. The prohibiting of free food or drink or entertainment, which is 100 meters from any voting booth. And there's seen a slight increase of anonymous political donations from $5,000 to $6,000. So the initial response to the changes from a legal perspective is that it's unjustified, it's dangerous, and it's discriminatory. So from a legal perspective, the removal of the same-day enrollment or voting and the reinstatement of a total ban on prisoner voters, according to a report from the Attorney General, is inconsistent with Section 12 of the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act. So listeners might be wondering, well, what exactly is Section 12? Well, Section 12 is the right to vote. And that is at the heart of any democratic system. So the report that the Attorney General produced to government, they pretty much said, look, if we instate or if we remove the provision to be able to enroll and vote on the same day, this is fundamentally inconsistent with Section 12, which is the right to vote. From a community perspective, you and I know that we've got the lowest voter turnout Pasifika peoples alongside our Māori brothers and sisters. It's just another barrier that further disenfranchises our Pacific voters, and removing those provisions just has disproportionate impacts on our Pasifika population and participation when it comes to voting.
Yeah, I want to dig into that a wee bit deeper. As you mentioned, it's no secret in terms of voter participation rate among our Pacifica people is quite low. The perspective that I have, and maybe you share it, correct me if I'm wrong, we should be making voting as easy and as accessible to everyone as possible. This just further strips that away, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It weakens the participation. The aim should be to increase participation, not impose actual barriers. So if we actually look at the data, so in 2023, the general election that happened then, there were 200,000 special votes. Of the 200,000 or over 200,000, 97,000, so close to 100,000 people enrolled on the actual day and voted on the same day. Now, the Attorney General and the Electoral Commission data concluded that those special votes came from Māori, Pasifika, and Asian communities. So moreover, if you actually look and reflect on South Auckland communities, namely electorates like Māngere, Māngere-Otahuhu, which is the old Manukau East, and even Manurewa, we've got the lowest voter turnout in the country. So this enrolment freeze, removing this late enrolment safety net that our communities rely on, will actually detrimentally impact us. If we take a step back and think, okay, who does this law actually benefit and protect? You'll be, won't be surprised to see that it benefits a particular demographic, one which voices are always protected and largely heard when you actually break down the data. And I'm sure our listeners will be able to discern that particular demographic. So, we've got to, we actually have to think, who does this benefit? Who does this actually protect? And it's it's a dominant demographic that often sees our voices on the peripheries or marginalized even further.
Indeed. Look, I'm going to sing from the government song sheet for just a second. Now, the
Sure.
removal of the same day enrolment, they're framing it as necessary, basically, to kind of manage the post-election pressure. And I can acknowledge that. I do understand some of that. Is that actually a proper justification, though, for such sweeping measures as this?
Well, just two things. It's really baseless. Like, there is no evidential basis that these reforms will even work, and it's disingenuous. Whenever the government proposes some bill, like in this case, or whenever they undertake a new piece of legislation, there's what we call a regulatory impact statement, right? And in this case, the Ministry of Justice prepared one early in the year, and they didn't support the closing of the enrolment, period earlier, or that enrolment freeze. They pretty much concluded that the reducing of this particular provision or special votes is uncertain, and its impact on democratic participation could be significant. But moreover, the Attorney General pointed out, like, the benefits of this enrolment freeze are speculative at best. So there's no real actual evidential basis that these reforms will even work. When I say disingenuous, if you look at some of the commentary that the University of Otago law professor, what's his name, Andrew Geddes, he points out. So he goes, look, dig a little bit deeper. If you look since 1999, special votes have largely favored parties of the left. When we say left, obviously left-leaning parties, so it could be your Labour, your Greens, and Te Pāti Māori to a certain degree, eh? And so if we follow that kind of logic, restricting same-day enrolment or special voting can actually be seen as reducing the power of the left, eh? So you also can't dismiss the fact that the government are cutting back on the Electoral Commission funding, but at what cost to democracy? Participation matters more than convenience, and fast isn't fair if people are left out, which happen to be us, eh? So.
Yeah, from your perspective, and talofa to Judith Collins for speaking out against the song sheet that has been sung by government. How significant is it, given the function of her as the Attorney General, to speak out from government? And perhaps could you explain it for our audience, the function of her role?
Yeah, well, the function of her role in this particular instance is to give independent advice back to Parliament and to assess this particular bill in light of the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act. The New Zealand Bill of Rights Act is a set of rights that essentially protects citizens against the Crown. It's a measure of accountability, holds the Crown or the government at holds it in check. So when she came out and found the inconsistencies of these proposed measures against what her own party essentially put up, and the coalition government put up, was quite significant. But it just goes to show that it's democracy actually working, when politicians or the Attorney General is able to provide unbiased, clear advice in terms of whether these particular proposals sit consistently with the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act or inconsistently. So yeah, we commend her for an honest piece of work and for actually highlighting the potential impacts that it will have in terms of the inconsistency or breaches of the Bill of Rights Act, which are designed to protect citizens from the long arm of the law or the government in this respect. So yeah.
Let's shift attention just very quickly to the controversial situation when it comes to prisoner voting, for example, right? From a legal and rights-based standpoint, what's your view? Because I've heard time and time again from our Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, that once you're in prison, you've forfeited your right to contribute to community and society. What do you make of that?
Yeah, look, I think, well, it's unjustifiable. And we go back to the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act, and his colleague, though, the Attorney General in this instance, said so in black and white. She essentially said, well, Section 12 affords everybody the right to vote. It is a fundamental right that everybody has, right? And this blanket ban to anybody who is serving a custodial sentence, so when we say custodial, you're actually serving time, it sits inconsistently with it. And so if the government are going to disregard this advice and go ahead and actually put this blanket ban, it sits inconsistently with the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act, but also the Supreme Court decision between Taylor and the Attorney General, which actually upheld that, you know, prisoners do have the right to vote. It sits inconsistently with the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act. So, but from a Pacific perspective, especially for our Pacific people that are imprisoned, right, it disproportionately affects us. We account for 8% of the population, but 1 in 10 prisoners are Pacific, right? So that means that this law strips from the voting rights of our brothers and sisters who are unfortunately imprisoned, but we don't pick and choose who the law applies to, right? The law applies to absolutely everyone. That's the fundamental building block of society, or the rule of law, that irrespective of whether you're a prisoner or you're the Prime Minister, the law applies to everybody equally. So when we undo this right under Section 12, or when we undo this, the ability for prisoners to vote, then we're effectively heading towards undemocratic society in essence.
Yeah, and look, I want to get your realistic perspective. Is this a done deal?
Well, they've got numbers essentially. First rule of politics is a numbers game. Look, the government have the majority. Look, it did pass its first reading on Tuesday. Potentially, it goes to select committee, and then it will run through its process through 2 other subsequent readings. But because they have numbers in the House, this will most likely come into effect unless there's some change of heart come the time that it's hit its third reading. It's unfortunate because these are one of the very pillars of society that we rely on, that there's certainty that everybody has the right to vote. But unfortunately, more and more we're seeing these rights being diminished or being challenged under the current administration.
Look, final question for you, and I don't want to make this, a grim question, but I mean, it's ultimately reality as highlighted. It's a political game and numbers matter, and the government has the majority to push this through. Give me a sense of what this now means for Pacific voters come, the time when it's implemented. Will we just be worse off?
Well, yeah, absolutely. If you look at what the Attorney General said in the last numbers don't lie. That's 97,000 votes that will no longer be able to participate on the actual election day. You know, like, you can't eat democracy when you think about it, eh? When you're trying to actually think about how to put food on the table, the last thing you're thinking about is actually, oh, let me just change my enrollment, right? Our people are going through serious issues, cost of living, housing pressures. The last thing that anybody thinks of is actually, going to the booth, registering, and actually enrolling. And there was actual research that was conducted by the Electoral Commission that looked at our actual people by the Varian Company of Research. And they said that, look, 26% of Pacific voters just don't know how to or where to enroll. Hey, that's 1 in 4 people. In 25, actually, 1 in 4 also encounter barriers like missed deadlines to enroll, confusion about re-enrollment. 13% struggle with practical access, transport to actual polling booths, and so on and so forth. So when these measures are actually implemented, it further marginalizes our voices and it promotes a particular group. So this disproportionately impacts on us. In saying so, and if I can just offer closing remarks, this is the one time in which the richest person in New Zealand and the poorest have a vote or have an equal say, and that is at the actual ballot box. If you've got time to go and parade and fly your flag, because the very same hand that can fly a flag for the MMT or Toa Samoa parade is the very hand that can vote and shape policy for tomorrow. So whilst we can see the structural issues and the targeted barriers that are against our people, we also have a responsibility to get our people enrolled, to have our say and shape the government policies for tomorrow and today.
That's well put. Hey, thank you very much for your time. That is Te'o Harry Fatu Toleafoa, there, qualified barrister and solicitor with a Master of Laws, talking there about the proposed electoral reforms. You have a good rest of your day, sir.
Me taki.